Okay, welcome everyone. My name is Courtney Rossler. I work for the Department of Children, Youth, and Family, which used to be, well, we used to be with the Department of Human Services. I work in the Office of Economic Opportunity and supervise a team of folks that you'll see on this call that manage state and federal grants for food shelves, food banks, and tribal nations. And namely, that's TEFAP, the Emergency Food Assistance Program, and MFSP, the Minnesota Food Shelf Program grant. So great to see so many familiar faces and names, and we're going to get started on our webinar. Today we will focus on two topics, the USDA TEFAP rule changes and the ARPA food security grant. Could go to the next slide, please. Okay, so as I said, we will have folks from our office. So again, my name is Courtney, and I'm also joined from with Liz Riley and Dan Wilson from our office, in addition to staff from the Food Group and Hunger Solutions, namely Stephanie Robinson and Jill Westfall. Next slide, please. Okay, as I mentioned, this webinar will be split into two different sections. We'll focus the first section on the ARPA Food Security Grant. This is a new opportunity that's available for TEFAP Food Shelves and tribal nations. So we'll give an overview and background, provide the timeline and eligibility details, as well as how to apply. Our team has been busy putting together a Q&A with questions that we've already received, and we will continue to add to that Q&A document with questions that we received today. The second part of this webinar will be focused on the new USDA TEFAP rule change, which started January 1st. So the second part of our webinar will focus on the overview and background from USDA, the new TEFAP eligibility forms, and the FAQ review, and time for questions for both sections. I want to apologize for my voice. I am getting over pneumonia, so please bear with me, folks. And for those of you that are out there and sick, I'm so sorry. May we all get better. Next slide, please. Okay, so on November 25th, Governor Tim Walz announced a one-time $5 million investment in remaining really flexible American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA Act funds to support food security across Minnesota. This is in response to the increasing demand from food shelves and the continued strain on the emergency food system, which is, I know, things that everyone on this call has been experiencing. The grant period for the ARPA food security funding will be January 2025 through December 2025. The total amount allocated is $5 million, and which includes funding for tribal nations and American Indian Food Sovereignty, or AIFS, grantees, and for TEFAP food shelves. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, I'm just going to ask folks to mute themselves, please. Thank you. So as I mentioned, the ARPA Food Security Grant will be available shortly. We're very, very excited. It is modeled loosely after the MFSP process. So it's a non-competitive grant. Potential grantees must apply online. We have really streamlined the application. It's very short. It's not even as long as the MFSP application, and Stephanie will share some more information about that. You'll be getting communications and reminders from both DCYF, OEO, from our office, and also from the Food Group and HSM. And our food bank partners, as always, will assist with dissemination of information for this grant as well. Applications will be available, or the application will be open Friday, January 17th, this Friday, so stay tuned for the link. HSM continues to operate as a subsidiary of the food group, and so the ARPA funds will be processed through Hunger Solutions. So you'll be getting a check that probably says Hunger Solutions, just as you normally do with the MFSP grant. We anticipate that the funds will be distributed in March 2025. And we will do that as soon as we can, as soon as we get the applications and do the whole review process that's required for that. Okay. So as mentioned, there are two distinct pots of funding available for ARPA. The total of $5 million will be split up the following ways. Up to half of the available funds will be offered to tribal nations and current American Indian food sovereignty nonprofit grantees. And then at least half of the available funds will be offered to eligible Minnesota TEFAP providers, in addition to any remaining tribal nation AIFS unclaimed funding. So I'm going to introduce Elizabeth Day from our office, and she is a grant manager that works with the tribal nations, and she will provide some more detail on the first pot of the ARPA food security funding for tribal nations and AIFS grantees. Elizabeth?
Hi, how are you? I'm just renaming myself. I just saw I was named Liz. Um, AIFS grant manager. Okay, done. Hi, welcome everyone. My name is Elizabeth Day. I'm the American Indian Food Sovereignty Grant Manager with the Office of Economic Opportunity. The American Indian Food Sovereignty funding began in 2003 as ongoing funding. The purpose of the funding is to improve access and equity to food security programs in tribal nations and American Indian communities, helping American Indian communities and tribal nations achieve self-determination and sovereignty. And also, it's a way that the state sees in partnership and building relationships between tribal nations and American Indian communities. And we can go to the next slide. We have already had an information session with tribal nations and American Indian food sovereignty grantees, but just in case there's anyone here hopping on, I'll join in this meeting to give any clarity that needs to happen, because if there is a tribal nation who also runs a qualifying food shelf, then they would be able to apply in this pot of money as well. The American Indian Food Sovereignty Funds will be distributed with a formula. There is a base amount of money for each tribal nation, and then depending on population, that would change the amount that's allocated to their tribal nations. All the tribes have been notified with their funding amount. Out of the half of the money for American Indian food sovereignty, 30% of that is separated once again into a pot for the nonprofits that are current AIFS grantees. If you are a tribal nation or an AIFS grantee, I am your contact person. The tribal nations have already been sent their application and budget template, and the nonprofits will be getting their application and budget template shortly. Yep, and next slide. I'm not going to read through all of these, but when it was being talked about how American Indian food sovereignty shows up in each community, the state recognizes that food sovereignty and food security shows up in many different ways, and there is not one solution for this. So we left the funding for eligible expenses really broad so that it wouldn't be restrictive, so that each nation can determine how food sovereignty needs to be built, what areas of support are needed, and what areas of gaps need to be filled. Next slide. Oh, here's my contact information. Please feel free to reach out to me with any questions. I'd be happy to jump on a call or return an email. I think that's all for me, unless there's any further questions or discussions. But thank you for your time today, and keep in touch.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And folks, if you do have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. We'll have time for questions after this first section. And we'll pass it over to Stephanie from Food Group and Hunger Solutions right now, and she will talk about more details for this funding.
Yes, so Stephanie Robinson, your statewide food access liaison. So the information for the TEFAP Food Shelves for this grant is that the majority of the funds are distributed in proportion to the number of individuals served. So it's kind of the same as MFSP with the service statistics taking a role there. Your grant amounts for this particular grant will range from a minimum of $5,000 to maximum of $30,000. Obviously, this pot of money is smaller than the MFSP distribution. The service statistics from all the distribution sites and tribal nations will be combined to calculate your funding, same as MFSP. One grant disbursement will be made per agency or tribal nation, and then the new grantees that don't have stats yet will be eligible for minimum funding only. And then your eligibility, so TEFAP food shelf agencies with 501(c) status and tribal nations are eligible if they currently participate in the TEFAP program. You have your program ID with your regional food bank. Obviously, that's not a requirement for the tribal nations. You're in good standing with TEFAP and the food bank and have provided complete and accurate monthly statistics. So that will be July 1st, 2023 to the present. And then you've satisfied all of the prior reporting obligations for your state grants. Who's not eligible, the distribution sites, agencies, or tribal nation not in good standing with the TEFAP program or their regional food bank. So if you haven't submitted your stats on time, that would be an example of that. Distribution sites or agencies' food shelves that are not registered as an approved TEFAP provider or TEFAP approved with their food bank. Distribution sites, agencies, or tribal nations with outstanding MFSP final reports, on-site meal programs, and those backpack programs. And then kind of just the definition. So the agency is the tax exempt entity. So the legal name, it's often the 501(c)(3) that you're registered under, the tribal nation or equivalent. It's an organization, agency, tribal nation, as defined in regulations for an eligible recipient agency or ERA, and meets the tax exempt status, and your statutes are there if you want to look those up further. And then the distribution site, when we say that, we just mean where the food is being distributed from. So is that the brick and mortar site, the outreach program, mobile program, the distributions, pop-ups, etc. there. And then the ARPA funding allowable expenses are the same as the MFSP. So food, equipment, pretty much anything that you need to run your food shelf. And again, if you have questions about eligible expenses, feel free to reach out and I can answer those for you. And then the food bank ID. So this is the ID that the food bank gives you. It might be on your invoices when you place your orders. So if you're with the food group, it will start with TFG, and then there's 4 numbers after that. Second Harvest is C, followed by 4 numbers, a dash, and 2 numbers. And if you can't find it, reach out to your food bank, please. It definitely slows up the application process if you just type in something random or if you don't know. So please reach out to your food bank representative to get that number for your application if you're not sure what it is. And then the tax ID numbers, we're required to verify that you are active with the IRS. If your organization operates under the umbrella or 501c3 of another org, please make sure to list that name and federal tax ID on your application so that we can verify that you are indeed active there. And if we're unable to verify that you're active with the IRS, you won't be considered active 501c3, so you wouldn't be eligible for this funding. If you did recently with MFSP send me documentation, I know a few of you had to do that. I do still have that on file, so you're good there. Just enter the same thing that you did with your MFSP application. And then the final reports. So this grant period is January 1st to December 30th. So that means any eligible expenses between January 1 and December 31st are eligible, and the funds must be spent down by December 31st. And your final reports will be due January 2026. And they'll be sent out fall 2025, and they'll be available via the Hunger Solutions website and food group websites, and we'll send them out as well in our newsletter. And they can be completed anytime once the funds are fully expended, starting in fall. And then monitoring. All grantees are subject to monitoring by DCYF OEO and the food group Hunger Solutions. So all grantees must maintain and keep your documentation on site for 7 years. So examples of like your receipts, invoices, the front and back of your canceled checks, just anything related to what you were spending the funding on during the grant period. And the food group Hunger Solutions and DCYF OEO are required at minimum to conduct monitoring site visits, and those could be in person or virtually, with all grantees that receive over $50,000 total in the grant funding year. So that is like if you got MFSP, cultural collaboration, emergency grant, or this ARPA grant, and that total of all of those grants equals greater than 50,000, you will be subject to monitoring. So that's something to keep in mind, but we will let you know in advance of your monitoring visit. So keeping your documentation is super important. And then you must apply for the ARPA Food Security Grant funding online. No paper applications will be accepted. It will be available, the application this Friday. It'll be on our website, and it'll also be sent out from the food group, Hunger Solutions, DCYF OEO, emergency food provider updates, and the food banks. And again, if you missed any of those announcements, feel free to reach out and I'll send you the link, but it will be on our website as well. And then only one application per agency or tribal nation. It will include information about all of the distribution sites, just like the MFSP application. So you'll just list all of your mobiles, pop-ups, multiple locations on that one application. And then applications for multiple distribution sites connected to the same agency or tribal nation won't be accepted. All right, so now we'll open up the floor for questions. You can ask questions in the chat. Otherwise, you can unmute yourself and ask a question as well.
You just said this, so I just wanted to double check. We have 2 locations. And so we have to decide which one we need it for the most, correct?
Nope, so you will just list whatever the active 501c3 is as the primary, and then there's going to be a separate table on the application where you can list your additional sites. And so we just roll up all of those stats into one.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So you will be emailing us so that we go online to complete the form on Friday?
Yes. Yep, so you'll get a couple of different email blasts. One will come from DCYF, one will come from us, and then it will also be available on our website. And if for whatever reason you're not able to access it, feel free to go ahead and email me and I can send you a copy.
I'm sorry, I was distracted for a moment, so I may have missed it. When is the deadline?
January 31st is the last date to apply.
Thank you.
Yes.
You said that the checks, it's going to be made by checks. Is that also for electronic deposits like the other grants?
I'm sorry, I missed that.
You said that the checks are going to be mailed out for this grant. With other grants, they did the electronic deposit. Is that still going to be the same way?
Yep, so if you're set up for Bill.com, then you would just receive a Bill.com payment. If you are not set up for Bill.com and you would like to be, you can definitely set that up as well. The checks are just mailed out to those that do not opt in to receive a Bill.com payment. Then you would receive a paper check.
Okay, thank you.
So will this funding need to be for new programming or could it fund what we're currently operating?
Nope, it's for the current programming that you're operating.
Cool, thank you.
Yes.
I think we have some questions in the chat, and I believe that Dan Wilson will read some of those. Possibly.
Yeah, just trying to track down which ones we've gotten through. So let's see. Just want to reiterate, we have about 300 food shelves in Minnesota that are reaching out here. And then let's see. Does this have to be for new programming or can it be for the current funding?
Yep, and we just answered that it's good for the current funding or the current programming.
Thank you.
I want to reiterate, just the deadline is January 31st. And then, Courtney, maybe you can take this question on what is the formula used by the Minnesota Food Shelf Program to determine amounts? And
Sure.
just kind of differences with ARPA and MFSP?
Sure. The formula that we use is the number of individuals served. So generally we have a minimum and a maximum. And so if you reach that minimum or the maximum, generally we have that overlay of the number of individuals served during a time frame, and I believe it's the state fiscal year. And so we'll be using that formula to determine the amounts. It's kind of hard to say what the amounts are. Again, 2.45 million has been earmarked for TEFAP food shelves, but that's dependent. That could be more depending upon if tribal nations and AIFS grantees take all of their dollars that have been allocated. And it also depends on how many applicants we have.
Excuse me. So there's another question about fiscal sponsorship. And this one, Emily, if you want to put your email or reach out to MinTFAP, we might want to get some more information and clarify. So if you're a fiscal sponsor for multiple food shelves, would that be one application then? I think that would be good to take offline. So feel free to put your email in the chat and we'll reach out to you or reach out to us directly unless someone else has an easier answer they want to chime in. And then I think we want some clarity on the extra monitoring. So it's state dollars through the food group, so allocated through MFSP, one-time funding, regular funding, and this funding for the state fiscal year, which is July 1st through June 30th. If it's over 50K, there will be for sure monitoring, fiscal and program. And it may apply to anybody who receives funding, and most importantly, anyone who receives over 50K collectively will for sure be monitored fiscally and programmatically. Courtney, do you want to add anything on there?
Yeah, I would just say that monitoring includes if you get, for example, I don't know, we asked to see $10,000 worth of receipts, just verification or source documentation that the funding has been spent in the way that it is allowable, in the way that it was intended. So Stephanie and folks from our office may be doing that together. And again, it would just be show us how you spent the money. So that's why we're telling folks, keep your receipts. You know, I think the majority of this funding typically and historically has gone to food purchases. So that's relatively easy to track. So, you know, you would want to keep your food invoices from your food bank. But if you're buying, I don't know, gift cards, or if you're paying the light bill, you know, you would just want to keep proof of bill and proof of payment.
If we use like debit cards to go shopping at the store to buy food that we couldn't get, can we just scan that in and keep it? Because like the receipts aren't going to last for that long. So we could just scan it all and put our bank statement that shows the debit card purchases.
Yep. Susie, we want to be as reasonable as possible. And that sounds really reasonable. Yep. We would just say, you know, keep your receipts, keep copies of your receipts, just in case you do. So for those folks that, or those agencies that are getting over 50,000, you will be monitored. That's a state requirement. And we will also be monitoring kind of a random assortment of folks as well. So even if you're not getting up to $50,000 in funding for the year, please just remember to keep track of how you are spending your dollars.
Could I ask a question? I was wondering what the numbers of individuals served. You're using the state fiscal year, like for TEFAP now, starting what year are you going to use, from 23 to through June of 24, or are you going to use from July 1st of 24 through June of 25? I was just wondering I'm asking this question because we have so many more individuals now than we did a year ago.
Yeah, I think generally it's been the last 12 months. So assuming all statistics are in by the time we're calculating and everything, I believe it'll be the calendar year. But we can finalize that in the answers in the follow-up as well.
Okay.
But it's generally a 12-month period. And then just to add to that, and some of the questions in the chat around those statistics. So it's including individuals. So the question is, does individual served include each age group defined as household number or visits or number of persons? So it's every individual, regardless of age, in a household every time they come would be included in that number for that calculation. So it is a duplicated number, correct? And it is individual, not household. So I think I covered those couple questions. And then in terms of sites for statistics on the application, you'll be able to include every single site associated with your organization or 501c3 or tribal nation. And so include each organization by name. There'll be a table and the program number. Err on the side of including as much information as you want. And that way we'll make sure to get all the statistics together. Usually the only reason a separate program number wouldn't be considered a second site is because there aren't different statistics with that site. It's basically just making sure we're pulling all the right data from your reporting into the correct calculation. If you have questions on that, the best person to reach out to would be your food bank representative, and they can clarify sites and program numbers and reporting at that level. Jill or Stephanie, on your end, do you want to add anything to the calculation or data questions?
Nothing from my end. I think you got it covered.
And this is just an additional reminder, and folks do such a great job, but make sure that you get your stats in every month, please. That is how we divvy out funding, and that's, the numerous various pots of funding that we do have. So it's really important to get those stats in, please. Okay. Well, if any other questions pop up, feel free to put them in the chat or reaching out to Stephanie directly as well. Now we will move on to the second part. Next. Okay, thank you. So for the second part of this presentation, we'll now focus on the recent USDA TEFAP rule changes entitled Improving Access and Parity in TEFAP, which took effect on January 1st, 2025. First off, I want to thank you all for your swift implementation, and I want to apologize for the short time frame that the states were given by USDA. It wasn't ideal, and I think we would have all appreciated a longer time frame. So I want to thank you for that. And with that being said, our hope is that these important changes designed to make your intake faster and easier for you, for your volunteers, for your staff, and for participants will not prove to be too challenging. Next slide, please. Okay, so the USDA TEFAP rule changes include 5 changes with different implementation timeframes. So the first change, in an effort to expedite the TEFAP intake process, the collection of participant addresses are no longer allowed. So this change has been updated on the Minnesota TEFAP eligibility form, and the expectation is that your TEFAP intake reflects this change. So I have to say that this is an exciting change and one that I know a lot of folks on this call support and have been hoping for a long time. So I'm very excited about this. I'm sorry, I'm just looking at the chat here as things come in. We will be talking a little bit more about the implementation for some of these changes in the following slides. So the second change is that USDA now requires all states with the TEFAP program to have income eligibility levels for TEFAP of 185% of the federal poverty guidelines or higher. This doesn't affect us because we're already at 300% of the federal poverty guidelines. So this is something that some other states really will have to have a big overhaul and make some big changes. And thankfully, we're at 300%, so we're good. The third change is that states are required to share site locations of all TEFAP providers on a public webpage. So this is something that we're working on and will have completed by the October 25th deadline. With the move from DHS to DCYF, it has definitely impacted our web page. So we're working really hard to get that updated. And when that is updated, then all of your contact information, and the site locations will be available on a public web page. Currently, all of that information is available on the Minnesota Food Helpline. So it just works to connect folks to food resources that they need. So the fourth change is USDA is encouraging the expansion of TEFAP distributions to tribal nations. So I want to acknowledge the good work that tribes and agencies and food banks are already doing collaboratively in this realm. But as a state, we're expected to look for the opportunities to expand the reach there. So we will be focusing on that this next year. The fifth and the last rule requires that states have confidentiality requirements in place to protect participant information. And this is something that Minnesota is already doing as well. So all of the TEFAP providers are required to have the data privacy, which supports protection of the participant information at your agencies. Next slide. So what do these mean for you? Well, as I mentioned on the previous slide, I think the biggest is that addresses can no longer be collected as part of TEFAP eligibility. And again, I think this is such an exciting rule change and something that we have been encouraging USDA to consider for years. I think for those of us that have gone through, if you remember the CFAP distributions and COVID distributions, a number of you shared your desire over the years to have faster intake, and the removal of addresses does just that. So I remember when I worked at a food shelf and we had to do distribution sometimes outside, and on those really cold days, this would have been great to not have to ask for address and take the time to collect that. So the one caveat is that zip code is allowed as an optional question. So I just want to reiterate, you are allowed to request zip code. We do understand that it's beneficial to know where your participants are coming from, but it just can't be required. So if someone comes in and they're not comfortable providing the zip code, that is their prerogative to not, and they still need to be able to get food. Next slide, please. So talking about what hasn't changed, a number of things have not changed and a number of things continue to be the same. So for example, Minnesota, and I want to just again acknowledge and say thank you, I think has been at the forefront of client-centered TEFAP programming for years. And some things that have not changed, no identification or proof of address can be required for participation. And that's something that was a change that was made a number of years ago. TEFAP providers are required to provide food assistance to all, regardless of address, regardless of zip code. And we have been boundaryless in Minnesota for a number of years. Another thing that hasn't changed is participants still self-declare their income for eligibility at or below 300%. Again, they're not required to provide proof of income or proof of need. It is our jobs to provide the food and to trust that people are providing us with accurate information. And one other thing that hasn't changed is the data privacy practices that we have in place. Again, we've had the data privacy on the back of the TEFAP form for a number of years. We all understand as TEFAP providers that we can't share participant information and that we are stewards of that information that we do collect from participants, and we're responsible to keep that private. I'm going to pass the next slides over to Liz Riley, who's going to walk us through more details regarding implementation. So she's going to show us what this looks like day to day, and I see questions in there about translations, and we've got some great news about that. So Liz, please take it away.
Yes, hi everybody, Liz Riley, part of the team here at DCYF OEO, and lots of questions in the chat. Just want to acknowledge that we're probably going to cover a lot of these hopefully in the next few slides, but then we will circle back and make sure that all questions are covered. So if you don't see responses, just more information we're reviewing right now, so hang tight and then we will reiterate. And well, we want to jump into the new form, which we have sent out and have up here on the slides. The great news is we finally have gotten back the translations, and they will be all sent out with this form, the recording, all of this information in a beautiful email package early Friday. And we have it translated we will have it translated in 15 languages, so 16 languages total. 2 Swahili and Quechua are still in process just because availability of those translator services are harder to find. So they're just taking a little longer, but 15 languages will be available, no, 14. And sent out to you. We are just finalizing the links and getting the forms up. So that is really exciting. We've been wanting to have them available in more languages and updated for a really long time. And just given the turnaround timeline, we had to get the English one out first, and then we were quickly working, thanks to the food group Hunger Solutions for their partnership in making that happen. And we will have those available and out to you by the end of the week. So more on that to come, and we'll review the languages that are available in a slide in a few bits. But before we dive into the technical aspects of the form, just wanted to ease that question and let folks know that it is going to be available. Again, sent out by the end of this week. So As you all know, with all these changes, some changes needed to be made to our TEFAP eligibility form for Minnesota. And we've had the same form for a long time, so we were really happy to be able to just give it a little refresh and update it to ensure it covers all the things that you will need to be tracking for ensuring compliance with TEFAP. So we're going to walk through those pieces. There's sort of 5 key sections that you see called out here. The first thing at the very top, though, is to note that you can put your food shelf or food program name right at the top in the PDF and save it so that it's clear this is the form for your site. It is a fillable form, so if someone wants to access it on your website or online and fill it out in advance or just review it, that is an option. Excuse me. Otherwise, you can print it out and have it ready to go for your site. The first section is really about being really clear about who's eligible and what's required. It's here to help you, volunteers and staff, be really clear about what those pieces are, what is allowed and not. And then the next section, excuse me, has the data that is allowed to be collected. So you can still collect head of household. The total number of kids, adults, and seniors with the age groups are called out there as well. And then the total in the household. There's a simple place there to allocate a note, annotate if there is a proxy, someone they would like to have pick up food for them. And then the address is removed, which is the key change. The zip code, however, you'll see is there and optional. So it can be asked, but it just cannot, if they don't fill that out, you can leave it blank. You can put a line through it. You can put the zip code of your location, but it can't be, if it's not provided by the participant, it cannot be a barrier to accessing food at your site or impact eligibility. And then we've simplified the income eligibility table. Hopefully it's a little easier to read and navigate, especially across language barriers or just kind of reading level. And at the end, it has the self-declaration outlined in a clear bullet list. So those are the key pieces that you can walk through with them. And basically, it is the same as at the top. They're self-declaring that they're in Minnesota, that their household is at or below the 300% federal poverty guidelines. You can just kind of point to the section for the number of people in their household and is your household income at or below this amount? If they say yes or nod and attest to their information that they've provided being correct, make sure that they have seen on the reverse, which we'll get to next, the non-discrimination and data privacy notice. If you do it all verbally, all you have to do is check at the very end the verbal self-declaration and put a date. If you want them to sign or they want to sign, that's an optional feature as well, but it is not required. And that is everything. Nothing else to determine eligibility can be asked. Nothing can be edited. If you can advance to the next slide, please. So on the back side, while we know it'd be lovely to have a one-page form, these policies in their completion do need to be a part of the TEFAP form, and they cannot be modified. So I just want to reiterate that. I know I've seen questions and heard questions about can we just post it instead or can we add in things? Nothing on these 2 pages can be modified or removed. They are part of the requirements from USDA for the TEFAP intake eligibility form. These can be posted additionally, but it must be with the form and included. Next slide, please. So just reiterating, if there are pieces of information that you want to ask, we understand that it's helpful for other programs or for other reasons to get address for delivery, phone number for reminders about things. Those pieces of information can be asked. However, they can't be on or attached to the same eligibility form. It needs to be on a separate form, clearly labeled optional, and be really clear that it does not, their willingness to provide or not provide that information cannot impact their access to food. So just to reiterate, excuse me, if you want to have a second form, it can't be stapled to the TEFAP form. It has to be distinctly separate. So as you go through, you filled out the form, they're clearly eligible. Make sure to communicate, okay, great, thank you, you're eligible to get food. We may have other programs or other information we'd like to ask. It's very optional. It won't impact your ability to get food today. And then if people are willing to provide that information, great. If they don't, that has to be accepted and they don't have their access to food or eligibility impacted. Next slide, please. So if you are using an electronic database, which many of you are, the punchline is this process needs to mirror it and be the same in terms of expectations and requirements. So it should, that may require, we understand that may require working with your developers. We're here to support you with that. And we understand that there might be some intermediate stages where you have to work around your current process. That may look like working with your admin for the short term to make a field optional if it's already listed as required. Your address field, you may need to put in the address of your current location and train your staff and volunteers to not ask that as part of intake as of now while you work on a longer term development. However, the flow through the questions in your electronic database should follow as we've outlined for the paper form. The only fields that can be asked are those that are on the paper form, and then an eligibility is assessed, and any additional questions have to come after that and be clearly indicated as optional and communicated as optional. We are working with Feeding America and the Service Insights database to update the expectations there in hopes that that can be in compliance soon. And we are happy to connect with other developers if it is helpful. Reach out to us and let us know. And then I think we're going to jump to the next, one more piece. The participant bulletin. So given these changes and that we know that it may take some time to get all of the pieces fully implemented, especially with databases, and that there's a lot of people, staff, volunteers, participants to inform of these changes, this handy handout, as we have called it, participant bulletin, is available to be a resource to you. It really clearly outlines what is can be expected and what is not required to receive food at a TEFAP distribution site. And we encourage you to post it right by your intake section, use it to train and review expectations with volunteers or staff, and to post it in a very visible place to make sure that folks are aware of the changes and what can be expected in their experience at a TEFAP food shelf in Minnesota. Now I think I'm going to pass it to Dan to review a couple of the most common questions, and then we will review the questions and dive into some conversation and clarification.
Yeah, thank you, Liz. So hello, everybody. I'm Dan Wilson. I know a couple of the folks on here, but I'm a newer grant manager with DCYF OEO. I'm on the team with Courtney and Liz. And like she said, I'm just going to go over a few of the most asked questions that we've come across as we've learned about the rule change from the USDA. So Liz and Courtney have already touched on a few of these, but I'll just reiterate some key points. In the chat, Liz is going to be posting pretty soon a fact file, a resource that we have created that covers quite a few additional questions. So far, I think it's the top 20 questions that have come across our email inbox. And the first one is really, why has that turnaround time been so short? And we just acknowledge that the time frame has been short. We would have preferred more lead time. It would have been able to translate some things faster and get this out to you with a little bit more breathing room. But really, we are just working with what we received from the USDA, got it out as quick as possible per their directions. And the intent of all these changes is to make accessing TEFAP food shelves even easier for participants. So knowing that, and that it's already January 15th today, just please move forward with implementing this rule change if you haven't already, and we're providing the resources to make that as easy as we can. We can go to the next slide, please. And this we're really excited about, as Liz mentioned. The new TEFAP eligibility form has been translated into multiple languages. 2 more are coming. We're really happy with that quick turnaround time on that. Thank you to Hunger Solutions and the food group, our colleagues over there, in getting this translated. And links to these translated forms will be shared later this week in a follow-up email that'll be coming out for anyone that's on our mailing list. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. So we get the question, are participants required to complete the paper TEFAP eligibility form, or does it only need to be posted? We think this question comes up often because really there are 2 options for TEFAP intake and eligibility. One, the way that most folks are familiar with, that annual eligibility, and that's taking the form paper, electronic, and it's filled out annually when a guest comes in. And then 2, every visit eligibility. And this is a type of eligibility or intake that some food shelves use. And this is where the info is collected and eligibility is actually determined at each visit. And basically, if you know about option 2, you still must post the policies, the federal poverty guidelines, non-discrimination statement, data privacy, etc. But the eligibility criteria are the same for both. And so regardless, the change is going to happen across both of these. If you have any additional questions, though, about option 2 or whether you're using those, you can reach out to us or you can go ahead and talk to your local agency rep with your food bank. Go ahead for the next slide. And so basically, where can I find the links to everything we've talked about today, whether that's the TEFAP eligibility form and new translated language available, or the participant bulletin, or the fact file. These are going to be available through a follow-up email that'll come out with the links. We've also shared these with our partner food banks across the state. Currently, our DCYF TEFAP website is under construction, and it should be up in 2025. But right now, the way to get these links is access that email that'll be going out later this week, or get them from your local food bank rep. And so with that, we're going to turn it over to any other questions and back to the team. Thanks.
So I'm going to go ahead and read through the questions in the chat, and then we'll open it up for anyone to unmute and ask questions. So where are the Spanish forms for 2025? Hopefully we have answered that, in that they will be in your inboxes by the end of the week. And then where will these materials be available for those not able to attend? That's been asked multiple times. All the PowerPoint slides and recording and resources. You'll get a complete email from us, and then likely from your food banks and Hunger Solutions, hitting your inboxes by the end of the week. So you can watch for all of that there. And then there's a question about not allowed. I thought it just wasn't required. Courtney, can you speak to that one in terms of address?
Can you repeat the question? I just don't.
Address being not allowed versus not required.
Yep. So USDA has been pretty specific that the address, and I'm just going to take a look and see at one of the slides, that the address can no longer be collected. Okay, so it cannot be collected for TEFAP. So, you know, this is on our TEFAP eligibility form. And I see something else in the chat. We need address for other grants. Correct. We don't want to stand in the way of doing that, but just has in previous years. So when you have someone come in and they're coming in to get food, first off, they need to fulfill all the TEFAP requirements. They need to provide the information that's required for TEFAP, and then they're able to get food. If you want to collect the address for some other reasons, if you're a multi-service agency and you have, I don't know, other programming where an address would be helpful, you're able to do that, but it has to be optional. It can't prevent someone from getting food. So the TEFAP intake is for food. And if you have an agency that wants to collect additional information for other reasons, you're able to do that, but it has to be separate. It can't prevent someone from getting food, and it has to be optional.
And it has to be on your own form, correct?
On your own separate form, correct. Thank you.
Correct. Yep. And the forms have to be separate. They can't, once a participant has filled out the TEFAP form and then has filled out your agency intake for something else, the forms cannot be stapled together.
Right.
What we want to get away from is that perception that the other information that you're requesting is required to get food. And we just can't have that.
But that is what we do now. I mean, you can't have them connected now, so that's not a
Correct.
big deal. Yeah.
Yep. Great. Thank you.
And if folks need support for those changes, we can get you direct language from the federal rules, from the Code of Federal Regulations to support that. We can support you through your food banks reps as well, to talk about kind of just where this is coming from, and to have those conversations with funders where it's helpful. Because this is ultimately coming down from the USDA and the nationwide regulations for the program. So the next question is, can we remove collected address from older intake forms?
We've not received the directive that we need to do that. So USDA is just, and our stance is going forward. So going forward, you need to be using the new form. So when the food banks come out, when OEO, when our office comes out to do monitoring, of course, we're going to be looking at that. So just from now going forward, use these new forms. The federal poverty updates will be done in July, just like they always are in Minnesota. And then you'll have everyone fill out a new form. We're not asking you to go back and have everyone that's coming through your doors or everyone that has been through your doors to fill out this form. We're just saying going forward, get rid of your old forms, use this new form. Anyone that is doing an updated intake, just use the new form, please.
So, all of our clients right now have filled out the form from July to July. So those are okay. But the new clients we receive need to fill out the new form.
Correct.
Is that okay? I just wanted to make sure I understood that. Thank you.
Yep. Go ahead.
I have one question regarding that. If we had somebody fill out the old form in October, our plan was to have them fill out the new form in October. Is that correct?
That if it's an annual verification and it's every 12 months, that is also acceptable.
So we don't need to do everybody all at the same time.
So it's like a starting now going forward. So starting now going forward, just as Louise said, use the new form. When we send the federal poverty guidelines, when those have been updated in July, you need to be using those new forms because that will have the updated federal poverty guidelines. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I must have misunderstood because I thought you said when the new poverty guidelines come out, everybody has to fill them out. That's every new renewal or every new client.
Correct.
Every new renewal. Yep.
Okay. Yep. Got it.
Yep.
And we understand that this is we're not expecting perfection. We understand that this is hard. You serve a lot of people. I think the main goal is don't use the old forms, don't use old information, right? So you should just have the new forms going forward. And in June, when we send out the next updated form, replace all of these with the new updated form in July.
You would just don't have to go and pick all those people that registered after July and make them register in July. Correct. Okay, got it. Thank you.
So when we use Feeding America computers thing, so when the new things changed in July, we just verbally showed them the new amounts and asked them if they were in that. We didn't actually make them fill out a whole new piece of paper. Do we have to have a whole new piece of paper every July 1st when those change? Or we can just do it verbally once they're in the system?
Susie, I think that's a great question. And it comes back to which intake are you doing, right? If you're doing the annual one, then you got to do it once a year. If you're having folks as they come in every time, if you're asking them, hey, has anything changed? Is your income still the same? Then you would make those updates kind of real time as they come in. So I think it just depends on what intake you're doing.
But do we have to physically have them do a new paper? Or if we just ask them and then there is a question that says we updated it verbally on our form, that's okay?
I think it's going to depend on the system you're using and the changes as they roll out. So I think probably understanding the specific screens you're looking at and looking at that with your food bank rep would be the most accurate way to get a very specific answer to that. But it is, if you're doing the eligibility form equivalent on the database, you don't also need a paper form.
Thank you. And they used to be, if they had any, there were certain government things that it asked if they had any of those, they were automatically eligible. Is that totally out the door now?
Yes, so we've decided to remove that piece. And one of the things is we're trying to make this faster and easier on folks. And I think with language barriers, with as many people as y'all are serving and as fast as you really want to continue to serving them, it made sense to take that off. If collecting that information was helpful for you, again, you're able to do it. It just has to be optional. It has to be separate.
And that's nothing that any other agency was using, because we just collected it because.
That's exactly what we were hearing, Susie, is that, folks were collecting it and kind of just putting it in the drawer. And so, we want to get away from that practice. So.
And the ethnicity, that doesn't go for any of the grants anymore, that we don't need that.
TEFAP, USDA has said that TEFAP is not allowed to collect that information. So we're not allowed to collect that. Other federal food programs or CSFP or, SNAP.
So it's not in any of the grants anymore. You don't have to. Okay.
No.
That makes life easier.
So I just want
Yay!
to out loud acknowledge that we are after 3:00. We're happy to stay on and continue answering questions, and we'll be copying the chat and doing an addendum to our FAQ. So stay on if you would like. Feel free to sign off if you need to. But unless anyone chimes in, otherwise, I think we'll continue to just move through the questions for a little while longer.
I have one quick question.
Okay.
Sure.
So I hear a lot of people say from July to July. Is that what we're supposed to be doing, or does it not matter? Because I go from January to January.
It's an annual verification or an every visit. So I think a lot of people have made a process around the new form. But if you do January to January, if you do October to October, as long as you're, if you do it from, if you have, there's some databases that flag the exact date when it's been 12 months. So as long as you're doing an annual verification and you have a process that you can review with us, if we were to come out and monitor your food bank work, it's a every year verification, re-verification, or at every visit.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question.
Sure.
We have a food distribution where they actually drive up. No one comes in our building. And so we do have a form that answers all of those questions. It's just not that particular form that you have.
She doesn't.
So as far as posting, the paperwork that you give us, we gave that to whoever the driver was, but we asked, their first name. We asked for how many children, how many adults, how many seniors. We did ask for the zip code, and we never asked, are you eligible for the 300, the 300% piece? And we handle about 300 families every Saturday.
Thank you for the question, Betty. I see in the chat that your organization may not be TEFAP. So these are requirements for TEFAP organizations. If you are connected to a food bank, that would be, it could be a great conversation with them if TEFAP is something that you're interested in.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, I thought I was part of TEFAP, so. Okay, thank you.
So back to the top of the, go ahead.
I have a question if available.
Please.
So a couple of things we do have as our code, our regular food shelf where people are registering online, going through these questions. But we also do a distribution where we don't know who is coming ahead of time. So we have used a form that has, and I have since updated where we were not asking the address, although just for the sheer sake of paper usage, we had spaces for 10 people to sign in at the same time. do we specifically need to use that sheet of paper that was described? So in essence, if we were serving 150 people, would I have 150 sheets of that particular sheet? Is that needed, or can that be adjusted, I guess?
So it sounds like maybe it's two different things, and Liz, jump in. So it sounds like you're talking about like your sign-in sheet. Your
Like a
sign-in
sign-in sheet.
Okay, so the sign-in sheet could be different than your intake. So the sign-in sheet could just be a log or a record of the people that are coming in or the people that have come in, and that
And they're
may or may
signing in with that. They are saying how many people are in their family, how many children, adult, and seniors, and then they were initialing that they were in the federal poverty guidelines.
Yes, and so if we're talking about kind of that daily verification, that daily visit model, yes, that's absolutely okay. The one thing I would just say is, you know, for data privacy, just I know I wouldn't want someone coming after me to be able to see my name, maybe.
Right. So we do
yes,
pull.
you're able to collect it that way.
We have somebody that is helping, and we do kind of like pull as best as we can, kind of pull down with a laminated sheet.
Sure.
Do you know what I'm saying? As best as we can. So it doesn't have to be that exact sheet of paper that you showed then.
So yes and no. So the difference is every visit versus annual. So that form, and we can clarify this in the follow-up email. I think that's a good call out. Is the every visit eligibility process means you're asking that information every time. And you're not necessarily tracking the last time they were there in a system in a way that you know when they're due for an annual update. So if you're doing that on the sign-in log, that is operating under sort of that every visit eligibility process versus the annual eligibility process.
Yep.
So we can send out a template of that and just make sure your form matches that and you're doing all the exact same.
That would be
postings
helpful.
and
If
expectations.
there's another, that would be helpful, because all I saw from you guys is kind of just the one sheet there. That would be helpful, Liz.
And then, that's the standard one. And then from there, that every visit one has been option most recently since COVID, and we can add some more guidance. So thank you for calling that out.
All right. Thank you so much.
So a couple other questions I'll try to group together. So there's questions about the form. A couple folks called out. So they're in the previous link. We did discover, as well as you have all called out, that once you type your name in, once you print it, it didn't print. That has been changed and updated. It was a PDF technicality. So watch for that update, or if you are a PDF guru on your own, you can update that with Adobe, but otherwise we'll be sending that out. That was a technical miss on our end, so apologies for that. But yes, you can add your TEFAP distribution site name to the top of the form. And then just a reminder that if you're looking at our old DHS website, those forms are the 2024 forms. They are not the new forms. Because of, unfortunately, our department transition from DHS to DCYF, all of the websites are changing to DCYF, and we are waiting on that process to be able to put all of our forms on our website. So please look to your food banks and then the emails that we send out for the most accurate links, because the old forms are what are on the old website. We do have the forms in other languages that has been covered. Feel free to come off mute if your question is we're not getting it to yet as we scroll through all the questions.
Liz, I see one. We are towards the Iowa border on the TEFAP form. It says that they're declaring they're from Minnesota. If we have clients that come in that are from Iowa, are we still able to provide food? Absolutely. So the form should say that that it's folks' physical presence in Minnesota that that provides their eligibility. So if someone comes into your food shelves, regardless of where they live, they can be served. So we understand that folks from Wisconsin, folks from Iowa are coming in, and we did not want that to be a barrier, because again, Sometimes people are where they are and they need food at the time that they need. And so, yes, their physical presence in your food shelf is enough to provide them food.
There's another question about, does confidentiality requirement include other government agencies? And do we still need to keep the old TEFAP forms that have addresses on site?
So all TEFAP information needs to be kept for 7 years. So that's a good question. Yes, so even the old forms, even the ones with addresses, they need to be kept. You can shred them after 7 years. And I'm sorry, what was the first part?
Confidentiality requirement include other government agencies. So I assume that means, can we share information with other government agencies?
No, you may not. I think it just shows on there that we share the aggregated numbers that you submit to us. We share that with the food banks and with Hunger Solutions or Food Group. But other than that, no.
And then there's a question, are you fairly confident that this change won't be reversed with the new administration coming in at the federal level?
I don't think any of us can say that we are confident that what will or won't happen. I'm very glad that this change took place now. I don't know if it would have in a few weeks. TEFAP, while is an incredibly large and important program, I think for folks possibly at the federal level, it's a small program. So, we don't have an answer. We're hopeful. I'm glad that our administration here in Minnesota is so supportive of the food programs and continue to find funding to support what you all are doing. So I would encourage folks, though, if you really want to share your concerns and voice things, to connect with Hunger Solutions and the food group, because they do great advocacy and there are a lot of opportunities for you all to share what are the challenges and what your needs are.
I just want to pony on that last comment about not using other agents, giving information to other agencies. We've got this fear. We are serving probably 95 to more of our population is non-English speaking and mostly from Mexico and South America. And we have people who are in the legal business or have had that legal, and they're worried about ICE. If they come up to us and want information, I have a plan, but I'd like to know if there is a plan.
Louise, that is a great question, and I will dust off. I think this was before COVID, but this was a topic and this was a question. It was a concern and it was a fear. And so we talked with lawyers internally at DHS and did come out with some guidance that says no one can be requiring, a list of the participants that you serve. So let me see what I can find and see if we can't update that, because you're absolutely right. Your gut is telling you that you would not be able to share that information, and that was the guidance that we received. So TBD, but we will share what we can.
Okay, so my plan will work then. I'm not going to share.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I have a question regarding like our pantry saver is how we have them sign a current TEFAP form. Would you have any advice on how we can get the new form uploaded into Pantry Saver, or do we just call them directly?
I would say probably if you want to reach out to us and maybe connect us with your developer, we can have that conversation, because I know there's a lot of sites that have Pantry Saver, and we have worked with them in the past. So I think that's probably the best, most efficient way to get at that one. So feel free to reach out to us with the min TFAP at DCYF email, and connect us to Tom or whoever the developer is there at the time, and we will work with them to ensure it meets compliance, because we'll have to review the whole flow to ensure that it meets all the expectations.
And piggybacking off of that, so right now, obviously our pantry saver is going to have the wrong TEFAP form in it. Do we need to be at this point having them do a paper form until that one gets updated correctly, or can we just have a copy in front and like they look at that form?
Again, I think it'll be a little easier with a specific screen in front of us, as I'm not as familiar with what that's evolved to look like of late. But if you are honoring the intent of the rule and address is not being asked, no other questions are being required other than what matches the form. The federal poverty guidelines haven't changed, so that part will be the same for this form. And just make sure that all staff and volunteers are trained consistently, and maybe the participant bulletin is posted very clearly. And like you said, have the paper form available. But we're happy to probably reach out to your food bank rep most immediately and follow up with us if needed regarding specific recommendations for that process.
Hey, Liz, maybe I missed this. Did you already share our tip of like, if address is required, how to get around that in the meantime?
Feel free to reiterate.
So one thing we're seeing is that these electronic databases that aren't up to speed yet with the rule change, if address or other fields are completely required and you just have to enter something, we've seen food shelf managers take that and enter the address of the distribution site rather than ask it for the participant. It's just a way to get around that required option that is in there right now until the developer changes that. So just a little pro tip there for when you're out in the field.
And there's another question about homebound families, folks who need delivery. So again, just to reiterate, it cannot be required to access food. So they could have someone as a proxy come pick up food if they don't want to provide their address. But after it's been determined that they're eligible for food, you can offer as sort of a separate process. We're able to offer home delivery. We will need an address for that. That is optional. It doesn't impact your eligibility to receive food, but we can't deliver to you without an address, obviously. So it's just making that distinction on what information is optional, what information is required, and where eligibility is determined, and making sure those are distinct processes and clearly articulated. And then just to reiterate the database questions, a couple of them in here, again, probably given how many databases there are, connecting with your developer and your food bank rep or us, and looking at the specifics. But yes, the intent is as long as you follow the expectations and that it mirrors the expectations outlined in the TEFAP paper form, we're likely to be able to approve it and say that that works. The concern with bouncing around through that flow is that if you have volunteers or multiple people moving through that, it needs to be guaranteed that everyone understands the process to follow. And if it requires kind of some nuance jumping around, that may not be consistent and may result in an eligibility process not meeting those expectations if someone new or untrained is unfamiliar with that process. So keep that in mind as you're navigating database changes.
Someone had just asked about the neighbor intake, and that's what we use through Second Harvest. And they told us it won't let you pass if you don't put a birthday or an age in. So for kids, they're putting 10, for adults, they're putting 40, and for seniors, they're putting 70. So then it'll let you go through and it won't keep asking you those questions. So because sometimes my second part, I use their address or the house number to find, because I have some people with all the same names. If I don't have it on that form, once they are eligible, I can still ask them. Once I tell them they're eligible and everything, I can still ask for their address. I just can't have it on that form. Is that correct?
As long as it is not part of determining eligibility, so you'll have had to find them, and it's very clear that you're asking as an optional question and it doesn't impact. Yep.
Okay.
And I'm trying to navigate through the many chat questions. Let's see. Again, just reiterating, we'll put this in FAQ. Demographic information, similarly, you can ask other information as long as it's optional after eligibility is determined and clearly not going to impact their ability to access food. So if someone says, I don't want to share that information, does not want to fill that out, returns a form that you give them optionally blank, they still need to be able to access food and not have their service be impacted in any way. So use that as your guideline and think through your processes with that. Anyone else chime in as I'm scanning through if there's questions that we missed?
I was going to say, I've got a question while you're reading, and I'm sure you've answered
Please.
this a million times, but I was not here the first half of the meeting. So my understanding is McLeod Food Shelf went paperless through the pandemic because it wasn't required and everything could be a verbal authorization. So that's what we've done. We have like a laminated sheet. Once it's entered into our database, that laminated sheet gets wiped and there's no copies of anything being retained. Do I need to start retaining copies for people that fill this out?
If you are entering the information, saving it in an electronic database,
yes,
you do not have to have paper forms, is my understanding.
Thank you.
Courtney?
Nope.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you. That's what I needed.
Yep. USDA has always said to us, if they happen to pop up at a food shelf, the expectation is that they would say, Carrie, how can you show us who came yesterday? And as long as you have your sign-in sheet, you can print something up, something that shows who received food yesterday, then that's fine.
I was sweating when I got this new form. I went, oh no, but that is the answer I was looking for.
Yep. I think that's kind of the more older school way of doing it is using the paper form, but no, and we don't want to stand in the way of technology for sure.
Awesome. Love it. Thank you.
I'm skimming through and feel like we've mostly answered these questions.
So on what Courtney just said, as long as we have them in the system, I do not have to keep all those papers for 7 years?
So anything that has been filled out up till now, Miss Susie, you need to keep. Okay. If it's got TEFAP on there, then you have to. But if going forward, if you do not want to have folks use the paper form, you don't have to have people use the paper form. That's one option. If you want, just as folks come in and use your food shelf, if you want them to be self-declaring their eligibility at the time of that visit, then they're able to do that. What you would need to keep is just a record of people that come in.
So, like if somebody new comes, we give them the form and they go out in the car and fill it out until they can come in. And then I would add them to the computer. So I have a file drawer that since 22, when we went on the computer, I've just been alphabetizing those forms. So if they're on the computer, I don't have to keep all those forms for the next 7 years.
Here's my tip, Susie. Quit using paper and laminate those things. Then you can erase them at the end of the day and be done with it.
Well, we send them out to the car to be filled out, so.
That's right. If it's plastic, that just makes it more waterproof for this weather.
So given time, I think I see one more question and then just a reiteration about some database pieces. And then I'm just going to encourage everybody who still has questions or very specific pieces they want to review or specific database requests. Please reach out to your food bank representatives and or ourselves. Dan, if you wouldn't mind throwing the MinTEFAP email in again, and watch for an email at the end of probably early Friday morning that will have all of this, the recording, the slides, updated FAQ, translated forms. It'll be a nice little goodie bag to head into the long weekend, hopefully for most. And then do reach out to your food bank representative or ourselves if you have specific questions. We'll continue to be here to support and walk through those with you all, and it'll help us build our processes as well. So that we can support other food shelves who may have similar questions. So Courtney, there's one more question in here. Jennifer posted it from a partner. If we aren't allowed to ask for an address or names of household members, how do we determine if people live in the same household? We are a relatively small food shelf and have to give out food based on household size. If 3 individuals living together each sign up to receive food for a household of 3, and we don't know if they are living together, we'll be giving them enough food for a household of 9. Please respond.
So sometimes multiple households live in one same house. But if they're self-reporting that they are separate households, then that's what we do, and that's how we record them. So if someone says, yes, I may live at the same address, this is prior, I may live at the same address as my sister, but I have different food needs and she has different food needs. We recognize that, we acknowledge that, and we accept that. So It shouldn't have pretty much been going on. So now if someone comes in and they say they have 3 people in their household and their zip code is 55113, and someone else comes in behind them saying, I've got 6 people, 55113, they're in the same car. That's not for us to use to determine their eligibility. We treat them individually as they want to be treated as separate households. And that's that. It doesn't change the number of people in that example, but it does acknowledge the autonomy of folks self-reporting their needs and their household.
So I apologize if we missed any questions or any levels of specificity. Please do reach out. We are here to support. We will be sending additional guidance and resources. Courtney, Food Group, anything else to add in?
I just have a question. When you talk about we should contact our food bank rep, is Second Harvest our food bank?
Wherever you order,
pardon?
Yeah, where you're ordering your TEFAP from, Louise?
Second Harvest.
Then yes. Yep.
Okay. So, but I know there's the food group, and we don't get food from them, but I was confused if you were just talking about them.
We're all in it together, but your TEFAP food shelf, where you get your TEFAP food bank, where you get your TEFAP food, is your first point of contact for any TEFAP related questions in terms of compliance.
Okay. Thank you, girls, very much. Bye.
Thank you all. Oh my gosh, this has been wonderful. We appreciate it. Thank you so much for staying on for your questions. We'll send out, just as Liz said, a goodie bag full of everything. Apply for the grant. It's just a little extra change for you. So thank you so much, and good luck, everyone. Stay healthy.